one of the topics I talk a lot about because people have a lot of questions about it is what about these other so-called gospels that floated around in the early centuries, and what do we do with them, and why should we think the gospels we have in our Bibles, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, are the right ones, right? Why these and no others? And that's a really good question. This issue of lost gospels has been known about for generations from scholars, right? We've known these have existed for a long time. But really, in the 20th century, what really brought this to bear on the public conversation is manuscript discoveries. We started finding, because our archaeological excavations got more sophisticated and more broad and more thorough, we just started finding more manuscripts, certainly of our canonical gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. But then we began to find other gospels we never heard of before, ones that we didn't have either knowledge of or we knew about them but didn't have copies of. And this began to raise those questions about why did we ended up with the gospels in our Bibles and not others. Now, the Gospel of Thomas, interestingly, was first discovered in the very end of the 19th century, 1890 something. It was found in a little place called Oxyrhynchus, Egypt, where the archaeological dig had begun. And when they found this little tiny fragment of the Gospel of Thomas, they didn't even know it was the Gospel of Thomas because it was so fragmentary. It wasn't until much later in another archaeological site they found the full version of that in 1945 and realized, okay, so this is a gospel purportedly written by Thomas, one of the 12, that sounds very different than what we find in our Bibles. If you were to read the Gospel of Thomas, you'd realize it doesn't sound like our gospel because it's not even a story. It's not even a history of Jesus. It's just a bunch of sayings. Okay. Jesus said this, Jesus said that. And there's 114 of these sayings. So it's just a collection of things that Jesus said, some of which sound similar to the ones we have in our Gospels, and some of which are just bizarre and strange and weird. And so this has occasioned lots of discussion. Why do we not have the Gospel of Thomas in our Bibles? There's a really simple reason, actually, and it's not at all hard to grasp. And that is it was written late, well after the time of Jesus and well after the time of the apostles, and therefore could not have been written by any of Jesus's followers, nor any friends of his followers, nor any eyewitnesses. The consensus now is that the Gospel of Thomas is probably written in the late 2nd century, which would be well over a century and a half from the time of Jesus and well over a century from the time of the apostles. What does that mean? That means Thomas didn't write it. It's given the name Thomas because people look for a name to attach to these Gospels to give it some attention, but it's not written by Thomas, not written by any of the 12. And when it comes to our Gospels, though, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, all of those can be traced back either to one of the 12 or to a companion of the 12, to the original eyewitnesses and followers of Jesus, which puts our Gospels in the 1st century. So I just tell people very simply, if you were choosing your own Gospel, would you choose a Gospel from the 1st century during the time of Jesus and his disciples, or would you choose a Gospel from the 2nd century well after they lived? And I think most people would just automatically say, well, I kind of want to get as close to these events as I possibly can. Well, you only got 4 choices then. There's only 4 Gospels dated to the 1st century. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John.